And
All
we're live.
right. Hello again, everyone. Welcome to our next session about the future of privacy and technology. So I think this is sequenced well because we were just talking about how snaps empower private use cases and private data. And it's very important. And let's zoom out a bit away from crypto because privacy is one of the defining challenges of our age in crypto, but more importantly in the larger tech world. And I think it's important that we recognize this if we want crypto to grow and become and empower a larger part of the tech world. Privacy impacts the UX of products we use every day. It impacts the fairness of systems that people around the world interact with. It impacts their livelihoods. Everyone has read many disaster scenarios around the world that mess up with people's finances, their reputation, their privacy, their personal lives. So it's very, very important that we're talking about this. And I'd like to thank our panelists so much for joining us. Jill, Avichal, Ash. It's great to be here with you. Can you, to start things off with, please tell the audience briefly about yourselves, how you initially got introduced to Mina, and what you think makes privacy fundamentally important. Jill, maybe let's start with you.
Yeah, sure. It's great to be back on, and my microphone is actually working this time, unlike at 8 a.m. this morning for me. So it's good to be back on that front too. And yeah, so as I mentioned earlier today, I've been an advisor to O1 for the last 3 or 4 years and have recently transitioned over to join the board of the Mina Foundation, which is very exciting. And I first got introduced to Mina, or the technology that would come to be known as Mina, close to 4 years ago when I met Evan and Izzy, and they started telling me about recursive snarks and the ability to solve this problem of really enabling blockchain technology and cryptocurrencies to genuinely be powered by participants. And as I got to know them, started talking to them more and more, one of the questions that they really grappled with and I really grappled with was the question of, okay, well, what is this good for though? It's all well and good to say we can now do this new thing and have participation be democratized in this thing in a way that wasn't possible before, but to what end? And I'll never forget sitting there and talking to Isaac in particular about this. And this was right around the time that the Cambridge Analytica scandal was going on, I think 2017, around Facebook, and sort of people were asking in the mainstream questions about their data and their privacy in a way that hadn't really happened before as meaningfully as it was in that moment. And I remember Isaac talking about how important it was that we enable people to really take control of their data and also have transparency into how their data is being used. And that mission just really, really resonated with me. And that, to me, ultimately, yes, it's about scalability, it's about participation of the community and so on and so forth. But that, to me, has been always at the heart of what Mina is about. So really excited to be here. Post mainnet launch, it's still surreal to me that it's actually happened. But really exciting to be here talking about all of that today. Thanks, Emre.
Thank you, Jill. Avichal, you want to go next?
Sure. Good to see you. Thank you for having us. My name is Avichal. I'm a co-founder and a partner at Electric Capital. We're an early stage venture firm that focuses on crypto and blockchain. How did I first get introduced to Mina? Met Evan and Izzy probably around the same time as Jill, end of 2017-ish, something like that, about 3.5, 4 years ago. And was sort of blown away by the ideas. I think succinct blockchain that's highly scalable. I think distributed systems are only as resilient as they are distributed, and so I think that makes a ton of sense to me, and was a much needed breakthrough. And then echoing a lot of what Jill said, I think privacy is one of these things that we were actually just having a conversation. Jill and I were just having a conversation about this, and I think privacy is one of these things that is almost like an insurance policy. Like, you think you need it in certain small cases, but those cases are really, really, really important. And so in the cases where privacy matters, it matters a lot. And so I tend to think of privacy and privacy sort of use cases. I think most people think about them from a user perspective, because that's our internet-centric lens on the world, is like how many users care about this. And I just think that's the wrong way to. The right way to think about it is, how many use cases are there where privacy really matters, and what is the dollar impact of those use cases? And I would argue that on a dollar weighted basis, privacy is actually way, way, way more important than most people would intuitively think. And so, I suspect that there are going to be many, many important use cases that can be built on Mina, that between the sort of decentralization and succinct blockchain plus privacy, that just won't be possible in other places. And I think that's pretty exciting.
Awesome, thanks. Can't agree. Can't do anything but agree. Ash, let's have you go next.
Yeah, good to see everyone here. Looking forward to this conversation today. I was the last of the party, at the time Coda party. So met Izzy and Evan back in 2018. The genesis of that was I was at Consensus, sort of looking into the Ethereum ecosystem on the investing side 24/7. As I took a step back from Consensus, I went out and just read everything that was happening beyond the Ethereum ecosystem. And I came across, this concept of the succinct blockchain, and sort of saw the tagline of the entire blockchain is the size of a few tweets, and that just blew my mind. So whenever I'm investing, the lens I look at things from is, is this going to create entirely new markets? Does this transform the status quo? And a lot of this, companies or protocols that are able to do that, it's built off of a new technology or a development, sort of a further of an existing technology. And that was exactly apparent with, Evan and Izzy's vision. And yeah, honestly, fantastic to see how far we've come. And it's really just the beginning. So I think privacy, you can look at it from so many different lenses, from sort of the financial aspect, informational, how you're interacting, how you're sort of interacting yourself, and then sort of the companies you work at. It's both retail, corporate, institutional. There's so many different lenses to it. And I feel like with Mina, we're unlocking a lot of those potential use cases, and just sort of looking at the speakers from earlier. I mean, just some of the applications we were talking about, just absolutely fascinating. So, very excited to see what's going to be a long journey ahead, and obviously already proven out a bunch of stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, so maybe to summarize, privacy is important, first of all, because it's about people. It impacts all of us. It is a huge market, as Avichal said, probably way, way larger than many other people think. And also it unlocks a lot of use cases. So, all reasons to be excited by themselves, but the three of them combination, it's huge how much impact this is going to have. So maybe first start diving into where we are with privacy and crypto. Let's start from the smallest subset that we got. And I'd like to do a bit of a state of the union approach to privacy within crypto. Crypto blockchains is supposed to be this self-sovereign, private, equitable value layer we as a society need and everyone has to use. Are you happy with where we are? Ash, maybe let's start with you this time.
Yeah, I think, and it really does apply to the entire crypto ecosystem, but I think to date, a lot of the work has been around infrastructure, middleware, and just now we're beginning to get to that application era. So it feels like, you can't point to a lot of these privacy-enabled applications, but, you have to sort of build all the infrastructure and tooling before that can happen. And so I tend to believe, not just for privacy, but for all of crypto, we're at sort of the reflection point of a massive influx of applications. And a lot of those will be sort of tapping into the privacy space. And so, I think that there's some fantastic proxies to look at. You look at the Z2Z transactions, sort of how that's grown within the Zcash community. You look at what's happening sort of at layer 2 within the Ethereum ecosystem, with Tornado amongst Aztec amongst others, and then I think in terms of applications and why, I'm so excited for this conference and what Mina is building is, there's a ton of white space for what these potential applications can be. And so we're so much further ahead than we were when I just started in the space in 2015, before sort of just the privacy protocols at sort of layer 1, and now we're moving up towards the application era. And so I think it's for sort of the masses to interact with privacy focused applications. Now is the time to be building in that space. And so I have been impressed by the infrastructure, what's been built out to date, things that I thought frankly were impossible to do, just to hear about SNARKs and SARKs and sort of intercommunication, all these things. But I think it's about to get a lot more exciting. And so I'm continually optimistic, but I'm getting more optimistic just looking at how large this audience is here today, and again, we're just getting started.
Cool. Avichal, you want to go next? I'm going to keep going back and forth this order.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. I think it's a great question. I was just thinking about, I think there's kind of 3 buckets of things I've been thinking about. So one is kind of like what's possible. The second is where are we today? And the third is kind of where are we going? And to Ash's point, I think what's really amazing is that if you look at the history of cryptography and privacy and a lot of this research, a lot of these concepts have been around for a long time, but it's really like in the last 4-ish years, 5-ish years, that all of a sudden we hit this inflection point of the state of the research started to accelerate. And so you went from, really basic zero knowledge construction through SNARKs to STARKs to all sorts of Halo and trustless setups and and then this sort of the broader ecosystem around, different approaches to building blockchains, whether it's, zero knowledge distinct blockchains or Mimble-Wimble or, even Bitcoin adopting different forms of privacy beyond zero knowledge. And so I think, the profit motive that's been created by cryptocurrencies as an accelerant to the fundamental cryptography is pretty amazing. It reminds me a lot of what happened kind of on the internet with networking and other forms of sort of research being accelerated because the internet just made those things possible. And so I think that's amazing. And then kind of where are we? I think we've just started to scratch the surface of turning those research concepts into practical applications, because it takes a long time for that research to make its way into production, because the number of people who understand this stuff is quite small. I mean, if you look at, it's basically like the Zcash team, Tornado, Aztec, Mina, there's, you start looking through how many people in the world actually deeply understand this stuff, both from a research perspective and an engineering perspective. And it's like 100 people. It's not that many people. And so it's going to take a while for all this stuff to sort of come to fruition. And I think we're just starting to scratch the surface of that. But if it parallels, and this sort of touches, I think, on the third point, is like, where are we going? I think if it parallels what happened on the internet, if you look at what happened on the internet, we started with sort of open HTTP and we slowly made our way to HTTPS, and we became, de facto end-to-end encrypted on most things. I suspect a similar thing happens in crypto, is the first wave of stuff is sort of open. And then as the technology and implementations catch up, we will move sort of de facto private. And that transition is going to take, several years. But the people who are sort of sitting in that new world already, I think are the best positioned. Like if you're already set up for that new world where things are sort of default private or can be default private, and those privacy primitives exist on chain already for developers to take advantage of, you're sort of, you skated to where the puck is going to be, and because I think that's where the world is headed. But I think we're still in a very early stage. So I guess direct answer to your question is I'm not thrilled with where we are today, because I think there's a long way to go to where I think we should be. But I'm also very impressed at how far we've come in the last 5 years, because the state of the research has advanced so quickly. So I'm very excited for where we'll be 5 years from now, because all this research will get implemented over the next 5 years.
Yeah, I would just drive that point home even further, is I think that something that even I, as someone who operates in this space full time, very rarely take the time to appreciate is just how far the underlying research and science, and not to mention, of course, the implementations of all of these things have come over a very short span of time. And to a large extent, we have the sort of crypto hype cycles to thank for all of that, whether it's money and talent pouring into the space or what have you. But if you look at Bitcoin when it was first created, back in 2008, 2009, a lot of what is now possible in terms of privacy today was not even possible then. And so Bitcoin came to market with this sort of promise of an anonymous or pseudonymous cryptocurrency. Of course, much of that has been determined to be quite false. I think that that's something that the industry is still really grappling with today, is this misconception of Bitcoin as something that is anonymous and private and so on and so forth. I think that if you talk to your average person who doesn't work full-time in the space, they often still think that Bitcoin is private and anonymous and all of these things. And so that's something that we as an industry have had to overcome, is figuring out how to communicate the nuances around all of this. But then again, to Avichal's point, and Ash touched on this too, today all of this is possible in terms of privacy implementations. And I think if I were to predict, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years from now, I think that we'll be talking about zero knowledge proofs, and SNARKs and STARKs and all of these privacy technologies and implementations, the same way that people were talking about the blockchain, 3, 4, 5 years ago as this technology that has value in and of itself, not just as something that can be implemented within a cryptocurrency system and provide really real value, whether it's to individuals who are worried about their privacy, whether that's to enterprises who can use these things in order to, even be compliant. Often privacy is conflated with non-compliance, but there's a lot here that can be built out. I saw someone in the chat actually talking about a KYC AML system built out on this. I think that that's actually a great use case. And I think that that's we're going to see just this flourishing of applications and experimentation built out on these privacy technologies that weren't even possible to date. So the quick answer, Emre, if I'm happy with where the state of the world is today, I am, but only because I can appreciate how far we've come in really not a long span of time on the front of what we're even technologically capable of.
Yeah, thank you all. And it's certainly crazy how fast this all has accelerated. Like personally as well, like I had been also in this industry before I started working with O1 Labs. I'd never heard of zero knowledge proofs and would not have heard about it at all if it weren't for some of the crazy implications and the research going into this space. So there's a lot to do, but we're getting there fast, and that's the good news. But let's talk about how we're getting there, right? Because it's one thing to say, yes, we'll get there in 5 years, but let's talk about how. And Jill, maybe let's start with you. So you're also the co-founder of the Open Money Initiative, and have also personally done a lot of research into the use of crypto in emerging economies. How can crypto and this technology empower people in those economies? Based on what you've seen, what do we need to do to stop the privacy of millions of people there from being violated? Because if these people start using this technology, they need to be aware of what's going on, and if they just use it, their privacy will be at risk. So, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I've had the privilege of working with some populations that are on the most extreme end of the spectrum in terms of their privacy needs. People who are fearful of targeting by their own government, even if they're found to be using cryptocurrency and engaging in cryptocurrency. And, a lot of these people are in places and markets like Venezuela, like Cuba, like Iran, very repressive regimes, places that have experienced inflation, capital controls, all of these sorts of things. And to me, these people are the people who have sort of the most extreme need for this technology, but to date have been very limited in their ability to engage with it because of the data leakage and the risk that they take on in doing so. And that goes for, sort of engaging with Bitcoin and then the kind of like blockchain analysis that can be done in order to trace it back to, give an IP address and then give an individual. That goes for Bitcoin miners. Like I've spoken to Bitcoin miners in places like Venezuela, where the government literally uses spikes in energy usage on the grid in order to track down, what neighborhood people are in who are mining Bitcoin, things like this. And so that's something I think is actually really worth touching on here in terms of when we talk about privacy, really narrowing in on what we mean by privacy, because there are all of these different angles to it. There's, the ability to trace it back to a given person using data leakage from the blockchain itself. There's the ability to trace back to a given person based on infrastructure usage and that whole layer of it that doesn't even necessarily touch the blockchain itself. And to me, it's just really exciting to see a technology like Mina come to market that solves for so many of these angles of it. Again, whether that's data leakage or whether that's, it's a proof of stake system. And so the question of mining capacity is not there anymore. So that's really heartening to me, but yeah, it's been challenging at times over the years in having these conversations with people who have oftentimes learned the hard way because they heard, oh, Bitcoin is anonymous, and then learned the hard way that in fact it's not, and in fact their usage of Bitcoin or whatever it is can be traced right back to them.
Yeah, very, very hard problems. And, just one of many hard problems all of these layer ones, new ones, including Mina, are trying to solve. And Avichal, I want to discuss that with you. Electric's an investor in one of many of the successful new layer ones out there. Do you see these projects approach this problem in a unified fashion? Is there like a magical solution? Or if not, are there specific examples you think are doing a good job?
Yeah, great question. No, I don't think there's a magical solution. And I all these things have different trade-offs, right? It's like often you're trading off between speed and scalability and throughput versus privacy and user experience. And these are not all strict trade-offs. And I mean, that's really the beauty of technology, right? It's like technology as it advances makes things that were previously trade-off no longer a trade-off. That's fundamentally what technology is. But there are still often trade-offs, practically speaking. And so there's no unified approach. And I think people are sort of saying, well, in some cases, I really want extreme privacy, default privacy, like turn all of that on, and I'm willing to sacrifice some speed or throughput or usability to get that. And in other cases, people are saying, you know what, I really want this to be fast because I want to do payments. And so I'm willing to make a different set of trade-offs. And to me, sort of zooming out as an investor, I think this is not a zero-sum situation. Like, if you look at the internet, even something as simple as social networks, which are also very network effect driven kind of product, I think there was a time where people said there's going to be one massive social network that wins, and that's like the social network everybody will use. And that was only half correct. It turns out you have Facebook, and you have TikTok, and you have Snap, and you have Twitter, and you have Telegram, and you have WhatsApp. You run down the list, and you realize that actually when the market size is 3 billion people, and in this case, with cryptocurrencies and blockchain technology, it's not only 3 billion people, but it's all of the businesses and all of the financial institutions in the world. Odds are there are going to be many, many winners. And there's going to be, it's not going to be winner takes all. There might be one big winner, like maybe Bitcoin or Ethereum is a big winner. But there are likely to be many, many winners that solve different problems in different ways with different trade-offs or different kinds of users, because there might be 300 million people that want a certain set of trade-offs. And they'll find their product for them. So our approach basically has been the market size here probably is 10 to 100x bigger than most people intuitively are getting their heads around. And so all of these have a shot at winning, and they actually all help each other, because the more people that are in this ecosystem that think about these things and say, well, in this case, this trade-off makes sense. In this case, this trade-off makes sense, is actually very additive, and they all sort of flow back and forth to each other. So things like, Mina or mobile coin or Zcash, I think all sort of benefit each other.
Yeah, I think that's very interesting to also think about how no single protocol or blockchain is static. They're all changing all the time as people and users discover new issues. Like I remember with Ethereum, back in, I forget, 2017, 18, suddenly everyone realized, oh my God, the minute I use MetaMask, I'm sharing my public address to all the websites that are out there, and everyone is tracking all of my transactions. But then they started fixing it, right? MetaMask upgraded itself. There have been protocol upgrades that help with this issue. And Ash, maybe going to your experience, you were very early on at Consensus, one of the major Ethereum contributors. How have you seen the Ethereum ecosystem tackle this problem? Are there specific solutions that you think were really helpful in pushing the ecosystem and the technology forward?
Yeah, and I think you have these forcing functions. Whenever you have a large behavioral change, you have typically a small group of people that are going to be quite vocal, and then just over time, whether it's sort of a macro event or just this loud minority that comes out and just sort of changes the status quo and how things are handled. I think with Cambridge Analytica, there have been a number of these sort of macro factors over the last few years, and it's sort of led to Signal's adoption. I mean, today I continue to see more and more of my just regular friends from growing up or from college or whatever it may be adopting Signal. I think you look at just the growth in privacy protocols, and I think you're going to continue to have these sort of macro effects that really drive the status quo to just change how you're approaching problems, or change the status quo to being private or whatever it may be. But typically it's around a select few number of people that are, pushing for, you use 10, 20 different wallets. You don't tweet out your ENS name and tie it to your public identity. And I think we're going to continue to see sort of iterations on what the norm might look like, but you're going to constantly have these sort of smaller groups that are driving that eventually until it reaches a status quo. And And I think just going back to the prior point, these blockchains are still, even sort of the oldest blockchain, Bitcoin, we're still in a nascent state here. And so we're going to constantly be around, what is the future looking like? And the great thing is you have a lot of extremely bright people that are shaping this future, and folks, that are sort of within this conference that are, helping to shape up what that status quo is going to look like. And a lot of different routes can win, so it could be separated by geo, it can be separated by, demographics, age groups, whatever it may be. But sort of shaping the future is the most exciting part for me as an investor.
Yeah, and I think it's fair to say crypto is shaping the future. As we all know, these are the brave souls that are pushing the frontier, initially within crypto, but eventually that's going to trickle out to the larger tech world. What do you guys have any solutions that we here in the crypto world are maybe heavy users or all believe that will shape the future that you think will trickle out and get everyone else start to use them, whether or not they're interested in crypto? And feel free to take it at a random order, I guess. Let's shake things up a bit this time.
Well, I mean, I think my take on it is, I think all of this stuff is going to go mainstream, whether it's Bitcoin or decentralized payments, peer-to-peer currencies, DeFi platforms, like all of this stuff is going to go mainstream. So in a sense, it's less about the world sort of adopting things that are cryptocurrencies and the cryptocurrencies and blockchain and privacy tech just becoming the world. Sort of by analogy, it's sort of like companies and people didn't adopt mobile apps. Mobile apps just became the thing that you did, and they sort of disappeared into the background, right? So today, if you're starting a company and you went to an investor and you said, "Hey, I'm starting a mobile company," they'd be like, "Well, obviously, like if you weren't doing that, what the hell would you be doing, right? Like, because everything is mobile." And so I think that's kind of what happens is sort of if things are successful, they sort of eat up the world and then they disappear. And so what I expect happens over the next decade is all of these things that we're talking about will just sort of back into fintech and creator economy. Like creators are coming on board and saying, "Hey, look, I don't want to be disintermediated by the platforms either. And so I want a direct relationship with my fans and with my customers." Or marketplaces saying, "Hey, I can incentivize and reward my earliest participants in the marketplace with these sorts of techniques." Like I think what happens is crypto sort of eats up the world, crypto and blockchain eats up the world, and then it just fades into the background and we don't even talk about it anymore. Like it just becomes the thing and it becomes so, it just permeates everything. And at that point you stop talking about it in a sense. That's kind of what I think will happen is that people won't even adopt it. It'll just become imbued into everything.
I think that's a great point. And I think, we already see that happening, whether it's with NBA Top Shots, right? NFTs. I don't want to go down a whole NFT rabbit hole here, but it's a very real phenomenon where, months ago I started seeing chatter about this, whether it was on TikTok or other places in social media. And people weren't talking about it in the context of, oh, this is a blockchain thing, this is a crypto thing. They were just talking about like, this is a cool thing that I can now do. And I think that we often underestimate the degree to which the appropriate infrastructure has to be the precursor to those types of applications, then kind of organically adopting it and then getting organic end user adoption of those applications. And I think that privacy is going to be a huge unlock there. There are just so many, there's a whole world of applications and a whole world of end users who are not willing to build or be built or engage with things until there are some of those privacy guarantees, especially when you talk about the financial use cases. But I think that they're coming, and yeah, thanks to Mina for unlocking that.
Yeah, I think both really good points. The last thing I'll say is long term, I think all digital commerce, every time you're interacting with the internet, with an application, whatever it may be, there is these are going to be underpinned by smart contracts and crypto networks, whether it's sort of abstracted or not. And I think today we're still on the cusp of that abstraction point. And so the early killer use cases are going to be ones where you have an intense need for sort of the early adopter crowd. And so I think we're seeing that within finance, art, music is coming. You can look at social networks. It's sort of this whole trickle effect in terms of eventually, underpinning all of internet interactions. And it's not just existing use cases, existing applications. We're going to see entirely new markets, marketplaces, applications that are birthed out of crypto as sort of the native underpinning to this next wave. And so I think it's really even hard to ideate on what those applications are going to be. You know, that's one of the most exciting parts of it. You go back to the sort of the internet era, and you know what was happening with Netscape and the browser, and you know you couldn't even sort of hypothesize Facebook or Twitter or some of the sort of the killer applications that came around. And I think we're at a similar point in crypto, privacy being one of those chief enablers to this whole new set of applications. So really exciting time to be in this space.
Exactly. And I think you hit the nail on the head. We're super excited to see what people will do in terms of privacy and new applications with some of this new technology. Hopefully Mina can have a play in that as well with its zero knowledge proof tech and Snap stack. So Jill, Avichal, Ash, thank you so much for joining us talking about privacy. And thanks everyone who listened in. See you at the next session.